is real. He is awake. And he sits upon the throne of his glory with all power in him. God is real. And he is awake. And he sits upon the throne of his glory with all power. Some of y'all still ain't caught on. I said, my God is real. And he is awake. And he is sitting upon the throne of his glory with all power in his hands. And since that is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, then we really have absolutely nothing to worry about. And that's simply because of who God is. And so by now we all know that there's nothing positive that ever comes from worrying. In fact, worrying always leaves a legacy of all things negative. Worrying is all about wasted time, wasted energy, wasted emotions, and yes, even wasted health. And we've discovered a number of things about worrying over the past few weeks. We know that worrying is nothing more than a steady diet of worst-case scenarios. Worrying is really running from something that might not even be chasing you. Worrying is really believing that your life will in fact be an unbroken chain of negative experiences, better known as a series of unfortunate events. And clinically, you already know that it really just means to disturb oneself with disturbing thoughts. That's clinically. But biblically, it means to be pulled apart. It's our hearts running in one direction and our minds running in another direction. It's as though our hearts and our minds have intertwined a rope around our necks and took off in opposite directions. And obviously, the end result is a strangulation in our lives. And worrying is therefore unhealthy for us, both physically, both emotionally, also spiritually. And so the point again is that why would a child of God worry when we serve a God who is large and in charge? So that I say again, God is real. God is awake. And he sits upon the throne of his glory with all power in his hands. If we really believe in God, and if we really trust in God, then worrying really ought to be deleted from our lives. And again, this is what's being addressed here in Philippians chapter 4. Remember the context of Philippians 4. Paul, the writer, the author, is sitting in jail. And if anybody ever had anything to be worried about, it would definitely be Paul at this point in time. Paul puts pen to paper, but he writes while he is sitting in a jail cell, not knowing whether or not he will be executed at any given time. And yet as he writes this letter, it does not ring with overtones of death and doom and gloom. Yet Paul writes from the heart, not paralyzed by fear and frustration and anxiety, but he writes from a position and a posture of praise and joy. In other words, he understands that even in the middle of a mess, God is still God. I said, even in the middle of a mess, God is still God. The fact that you are in a mess does not change the fact that God is still God. The fact that you don't know exactly what to do does not change the fact that God is still God. The fact that you're not feeling too good today does not change the fact that God is still God. The fact that you don't have any money in your pocket at all does not change the fact that God is still God. Even though things are not going the way you believe they ought to be going in your life, it does not change the fact that God is still God, that God is real, that God is awake, and he has all power in his hands as he sits there on the throne of his glory. God is able to replace the paralysis of fear with the power of faith. God is able to do what no other power is able to do. And this is why Paul writes these words, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. So if you want to learn how to stop worrying so much, you're going to first have to learn how to pray right. I wish I had a witness. Oh yeah, if you're going to learn to stop worrying, the first thing you're going to have to do is learn how to pray right. Now, prayer is simply a conversation with God between you and him. Implicit in the concept of prayer is the idea that you recognize that there is a God and you are not him. Prayer suggests that there is something on your heart that is disturbing you that you could use some help with. Prayer is a clear indication that you understand that there is, in fact, somebody greater than you. Prayer is proof positive that the solution to whatever has you concerned exists beyond the realm of human capability. Prayer must also be coupled with faith in God, and in order for prayer to ever be effective for any one of us, we must also have faith coupled with our prayer. Why? Because the Bible says, for without faith it is impossible to please God, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. And therefore, I want to suggest to you, my brothers and my sisters, that being in the habit of prayer will help you to grow out of worrying. Pray when you don't feel good. Pray when you're feeling all right. Pray when things are going well. Pray when all hell is breaking loose. Pray when people love you. Pray when enemies are hunting you down. Pray when the sun is shining. Pray when the storms are raging. Pray when you're sick. Pray when you're well. Pray when you're by yourself. Pray when you're in a crowd of people. Pray with the people you love. Pray when you get it right. Pray when you mess it up again. Always remember to pray. Whatever you do, you got to have a little talk with Jesus and tell him all about your struggle. So you're going to have to learn how to pray right. And prayer don't always change your situation. Because sometimes God wants to use a situation to do something different in you. Don't always pray against your situation. Don't always pray against people that are getting on your nerves. Sometimes God plants some people in your path to get on your nerves to make you better than you are. Sometimes he needs to show you how to forgive, how to love, how to change, or how not to be like them. Sometimes God puts those people in your path. So you don't always have to pray against people. You don't always have to pray about situations. Pray that whatever God is doing, that he will do something different in your life so that you will better be able to deal with those people and those situations. If you want to get out of the habit of worrying, you're going to have to be able to pray right. But then you also have to learn how to think right. You got to pray right if you want to learn to stop worrying. But then you're going to have to learn how to think right. Now, this is why Paul says in the passage, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are noble, whatsoever things are just and pure and lovely and of good rapport, if there's any virtue, if there's any praise, he says that's the stuff I want you to be thinking about. Now, the reason he says that is because learning not to worry has everything to do with what you choose to think about. I said learning not to worry has everything to do with what we choose to think about. Because what we concentrate on is a choice. Wish I had a witness in here. See, our thoughts are subject to both external and internal influences. Meaning this, sometimes we are influenced to think a certain way based on what other people say to us. Y'all acting funny. You know, somebody can walk up to you and say something to you. They don't have to have facts. They don't have to have experience. But we got a whole lot of little fickle people that listen to what other people say, and then they will respond to somebody else differently based on what somebody else said. Oh, y'all haven't had that experience? I've been here 18 years. I get it all the time. You got to be careful about who you allow to speak into your life. and who you allow to say, especially when somebody says something about another person. Because many of us are just garbage cans. And garbage cans don't reject the garbage, they take it in. If you want to stop worrying, be careful about what you let people put into you. Some people will miss opportunities because somebody said something that they took to heart that may not have been true at all. Some people have to go through broken relationships because they listened to what somebody else said. Y'all must not have ever gone through anything like that. But then you also got to be careful of spending too much time with you. Because you can say some stuff to you too. Sometimes it ain't to other people. The other people done said some stuff. Now you done listen to it. Now you start talking to you. Now you start talking to you. You're not using no facts either. And you can miss out on some opportunities. You can miss out on a whole lot of stuff because you talked yourself out of that. You can't blame that on nobody else. That's why you don't spend too much time with you. You told yourself you look good. You put on the absolute weirdest outfit you could find and stood in the mirror, and something in your own mind said, yeah, you got it, girl, that looked good. You told you that. That's why you ain't heard nobody else say it the rest of the day. Because nobody else thought what you thought. Wherever and whatever or with whomever you spend the majority of your time, watch this, will start to consume your thought capacity. Whoever you spend most of your time with, you're going to start thinking like that. Wherever you spend a lot of time, you start thinking like that. I'm telling you. I mean, think about it. Wherever most of your time is spent, you develop that thought process. I know police officers that spend a whole lot of time, looking for crime and making sure everything is okay. So when they're off duty, they still on duty. They still walk like they got the gun and the belt, and right? It starts to take over your mind. Who has cell phones? Now, this may be kind of gender bias because women tend not to wear the phone on the hip. You put it down in your pocketbook where you can't hear nobody calling you. That's what y'all do. We men, right, brothers? We wear it on our hip. Now, here's the funny thing. Our phones are now part of our clothing. How many people got a phone in here? See, people will leave home without a Bible. But we ain't going to hardly leave home. Come on, right? Now, it's just the day and time that we live. I'm not leaving home without mine either. But the other day, I started to realize, I spent so much time with my phone on my hip that the other day I did not have it on, but I still felt it vibrate. Now, you laugh, but I bet you there's somebody else in here that does the same thing. You don't have the phone. The phone is upstairs, but somehow you look down like. Wherever you spend most of your time, it will take over your thought process. Whoever you spend the most time talking to, you will begin to talk like them. You'll begin to think like them, whether good or bad. You're going to start to think like that person. A whole lot of people spend a whole lot of time at work. Guess what? Your mind stays focused on the job even after you've clocked out. You spend a lot of time in classrooms or reading and studying, and your mind tends to think that way. Hey, I spend a lot of my time in churches, preaching and teaching and church buildings. So my kids always criticize me because when we're riding along and I see an abandoned building, the first thing I think, that ought to be a church. And they say, he think everything's supposed to be a church. Well, that's where I spend most of my time.